Hey guys, welcome to this video about sensitivity and scenario table. And let me first of all, let me thank you for working extra hard on it. I know this is a little bit outside. This material is outside of what our class could permit, at least for me. I know other professors can do it on class, but I thought it would be best to do a video about it so that it's going to be useful not only for your homework that you're going to do immediately after this, but also for your exam 2 and the final project. Now this can be a little bit daunting. This can look a little bit daunting when you first start, but with a few attempts, you'll see it is fairly straightforward and simple technique. So I won't be doing it and taking this extra time to go and do this video unless if I didn't think it was important. You're going to learn a few really cool features of Excel, and we'll learn how to use those features in doing financial modeling, how to in making your financial models really flexible and useful. So this is the technique that we're going to use today, are very useful, okay, and in practice as well as for your exams and things like that. Okay, so one thing I want to warn kind of all of you is don't assume once you watch this video, don't assume that you know it already. Say watch it, go back, and when you watch it, it'll be best if you follow along with me and try to do it, and also go back and try to do it yourself without looking. That is very important, and that was very important when you did the first midterm, and this will be important when you do the second midterm. Okay, so let's get started with that. Before we begin, let me show you kind of the final product, so you have in your mind what you are going to expect. Okay, so this is the very familiar model, right? So this is FCF DCF perpetuity model, where we figured out implied cost stock price. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and this came about because of all the forecasting stuff that we have done initially, right? So we started out with income statement, balance sheet, and so on. Income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flows. We forecasted everything out, and eventually we made this free cash flow statement, and we figured out the implied stock price, which was so this is a different example, but which is $114.03, and this came because of very simplistic assumptions. As we know, all the forecast drivers were the average of the past, and we know there were problems with that, right? So even if it was simple enough and did a pretty good job, we know averages of the past are not necessarily always the best predictors, and we want to look at other ways to do forecast and other reasonable ways that can happen to our company in the future, and we want to see how that is going to affect our valuation, right? So that is the goal. So now the final product is going to look something like that. So you can change your drivers. So these are historical values that are linked to income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement previously. So all of these are already linked. These are linked values. These are just historical averages. But your forecast variables are not the averages. As you can see here, if I double click on it, the forecast variables depend on what kind of scenario you're looking at. So for example, this is called a realistic scenario, and the realistic scenario is pretty much the average of the past and so on. If you change the scenario, so if you want to look at the worst that can happen to this company. We'll click on worst case scenario and it will show you in worst case scenario sales will grow slower, cost of goods sold will be higher, will be higher and keep increasing, and so on. Okay, SG&A within sales ratio will be higher than average, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the worst case scenario. And a best case scenario, everything will look nicer, sales will grow at a high rate and keep increasing, and so on. Okay, so and when you do, for example, best, realistic, and worst, everything will change for you. There is fourth option which makes it really flexible, called the sensitivity and scenario, where now you can specify. Remember, in best case and worst case, everything was best and everything was worst. In sensitivity and scenario, you can change each of these variables one at a time. You can say, all right, so sales growth, let me keep sales growth at the historical average. Okay, however, let my cost of goods sold be optimistic, because maybe I'll decrease the cost of goods sold ratio over time. Okay, so that's what we are kind of going to do, and this is what we want to see. And the final thing we want to see is how it's going to value, how it's going to impact our implied stock price, and so on. Okay, and so you can present this is something you can present to your boss, this is something you can present to your client, so that they can go back and play with the assumption and see, for example, if you're analyzing a target, they can go back and see whether in best or worst of the situation, whether the target is still worth buying, the target company that you're looking at. Okay, all right, so where do we begin? So all this work is being done in the sheet you have already created, FCF DCF perpetuity table. We're just adding, see, this is the option exercise of value, and we're just doing everything right below this. But we have also created another sheet. For that, we have already created another sheet called, driver assumptions. In the driver assumptions, we are gonna list the conditions under which these guys will take different values. So the historical average, we're gonna put the assumptions down, all the assumptions that we had. Then we're gonna say, okay, if it is historical average, everything is going to be that. If it is analyst forecast, and we'll talk about what we are going to do with analyst forecast. Basically we are assuming, our forecast value is not going to be historical average, but what the financial analyst has been forecasting. Then we can come up with different kinds of scenario: optimistic, when things are going to go in our direction, in good direction, optimistic. Other one is realistic, another one is pessimistic, when things will go bad, and so on. Then we'll have measures of cost of capital too, right? So we have 6 different cost of capitals, as you know. This is a little bit different, but in our model there's going to be 6 different cost of capital, and there is going to be something called steps. So steps is something else that makes the model more flexible. When we go back and say, for example, give me the optimistic approach and plus add 25% to it. That means the cost of goods sold, let me subtract 25% to it. It says cost of goods sold next year is going to be low, and it's going to continually decrease over time. So this is steps will be embedded over here. Okay, so lots of cool features, very flexible model, and once you get the hang of it, it's going to be kind of really easy to set up to, but you have to practice. Okay, practice is the key here. So that's why I wanted to do this video, so that you can go back and forth and watch a few times and do it yourself. Okay, doing is important here, practicing or doing. Okay, so let me exit out of this. All right, and let me get started on our thing. So this is our valuation model, McDonald's, Okay, as we know, we started about by 10% discount rate, and we are also going to work on this the main the place where we'll be putting the sensitivity and scenario table will be this DCF, FCF, perp sheet, and we are going to have our assumptions put down in the driver assumptions column, and you'll see what I mean by that. Okay, so in the driver assumptions column, let's start from here. All right, so in the driver assumptions column sheet, we're going to put down different scenario, right? So what it means is, okay, we can have the historical average, we can have we can use the historical average as our forecast variables, as our drivers, let's say. So let's say historical average. Then we can have analyst's forecast. Okay, let's say it's analyst forecast or industry average. Okay, so we have calculated some industry average and we're going to use it here. Industry averages, industry average or analyst forecast, depending on what we have. Then let's create another scenario called optimistic scenario, another scenario called realistic, you know, the one that is most likely to happen, another scenario called pessimistic scenario. Okay, and let me do this and go ahead and put like a row number. Okay, it's assumption number. So assumption number, this is assumption number 2. This I should have called it row number, and you'll see the point of this thing. All right, you'll see the point of doing that in a moment. So this is row number 7, row number 16, and let's go to all the way to row number 17 here. Let's call this assumptions. Okay, so our assumptions will be the assumptions related to the cost, the drivers of the financial statements, which is basically these assumptions. So we are gonna, so instead of historical average, we are gonna put all different kinds of possible values of these growths, these rates. All right, so assumption, I copy the assumption and go, I'm doing control page up and down, okay, to move across. So in the assumption, we'll start from sales growth, cost of goods sold, effective tax rate, that all of that belong to the income statement. In the balance sheet, we'll have another bunch of assumptions that we are going to copy here, and in the balance sheet we'll have one assumption, the assumption about the dividends. Okay, again, you have to realize this is one way of many different ways to do sensitivity and scenario, but the way we're going to learn can be used for different things. Okay, so learn this as a tool because it's going to be helpful no matter how you do this kind of analysis. Okay, as the last thing, let's put down free cash flow perpetuity growth rate. Okay, and you'll see this is another kind of assumptions that we are going to make. So this is the first thing we're going to do. We're going to put down the assumptions here. We're going to work with these assumptions too, but start from the assumptions here. Okay, then do the averages in this place. So our assumptions, so we go here, let me start from here. Okay, so assumptions, we have some historical value, so I'm gonna go ahead and unmerge three of these things and call it historical average. And if you were to merge this data, you merge it, it is already merged for me. And these are forecasts. Now forecasts are going to be not always the average of the historical data. Right now let's just do the historical averages. Okay, so historical averages is 2013, not the average, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and so on. Okay, now for the historical average portion, we just pull the data from whatever it was there in the beginning. Yeah. So we already have these when we forecasted the income statement, balance sheet, etc. So for historical average, I'll just go here and do Control up and go to go here, so NA and so on, and I can drag it down all the way to effective tax rate, because that pertains to income statement. For the other guys, days sales outstanding and so on, I go to the balance sheet and I'll click here, and I can copy it across until 15 and copy it down until DNA to sales ratio, right? Then for the dividends, I'm gonna go and copy for the dividends, I'm gonna go and copy stuff from the cash flow statement, this value. So all I'm doing is copying historical value. Then we have FCF perpetuity growth rate. I know I have double growth, don't need double growth. Then let's add another column for the discount rate. Remember, we have lots of discount rates. Our weighted average cost of capital, discount rate, or let me also call it weighted average cost of capital. Okay. So for these guys, the historical value are FCF perpetuity growth rate. The historical values are here. This one, which is non-applicable, let's call it NA. The free cash flow growth here, NA, and so on. Okay. So what you want to do, the first thing is make these guys prettier. Sales growth, SG&A, other operating expenses, these things, other income is a percentage of sales, effective tax rate, all of these things are percentages, so just convert it to percentage. Debt sales outstanding is a number, so that's fine. This is fine. Other current asset is also percentage, so I'm going to change that to percent. Current liability, capex, dividend, all of these are percentages. Okay, and perpetuity growth rate is also percentage, and so on. Alright, so once we have made everything look nicer, I'm going to put a line over here to separate out historical average with the forecast. Okay, now the forecast variable is not going to be an average of these things. Okay, so forecast variable will depend on the scenario and so on. That is the important part. So the forecast variable is going to depend on our scenario. That's the point of this whole thing. Okay, now let's go back. And put in the driver assumptions. Now let's go back and put all of these things here. So now historical average. So I kind of think through it when I started this thing, because the historical average, I cannot pick these values from our income statement initially, because those values are going to change. So what I'm going to do is I take the average from the DCF FCF perp model right here. Okay, so I have the exact same columns like these, excluding discount rate. So I have exact column like these, taking averages, and I just dragged it down, and everything will be averaged up, and I can hit this percentage for most of these guys, and for some of these guys I'm gonna change it back to numbers, because debt sales outstanding, payable outstanding, and these guys should be general format, not numbers. Okay, alright, so these are our historical average if you want to use historical average as our driver. Now we have other options too, right? Instead of using the historical average, let's use analyst forecast. Okay, so when you do the actual real thing, you might want to go back and find out how financial analysts have been forecasting this company's sales, cost of goods sold, etc., etc., or want to look at the industry averages of these things, and some of which we have calculated. But to simplify things, if you want, you can go to Yahoo Finance's website like that and do that. However, to simplify those things and not to overburden you with this homework, what we're going to assume is analyst forecast is just rounded number of historical average. Okay, this is a big assumption. I mean, this is not really an assumption, but this is kind of a placeholder. But remember, when you do the actual thing in your job, you'll find out analyst forecast. All right, so sales growth, for example, just round it down. Okay, again, we are practicing and learning mechanisms. Some of these things we are just going to make up, right? So round up to a number of digits, up to 100 decimal points. Oh, sorry, 10 decimal points. So up to how many digits do we want to round? I want the 5.08% to be 5%. So what do I have to do? 1000 decimal points? That is interesting. How many numbers do I round up to? Round to 2 decimal. Oh, I was thinking about the places. So round up to 2 decimal points and makes it, this becomes 5%. Okay, cost of goods sold, round up to 2 decimal points and have that at a 34%. Sorry, let's not do that for cost of goods sold, SG&A, and other SG&A. Let's not do that for cost of goods sold, SG&A, and for at least those 2 things. Okay, because we have industry averages for that. We have industry average for capex and sales, so let's not do that. Let's not do the rounding thing for these guys. All right, let's put the industry average for these guys. Let's continue the other one. So other operating expense as a percentage of sales, just round it to 2 decimal points, and it's going to be 0. But that's okay, you know, this is a very small number, it doesn't have to be anything. Other income, effective tax rates, and so on, let's round it to 2 decimal points whenever it makes sense. So for example, for the days sales outstanding, if you round it to 2 decimal points, it's still going to be 15.05. So you have to round it to 4 decimal points. You have to round it to 0 decimal points. I'm sorry, 0 decimal points, so that you get 15.00. And so for like whole numbers, you want to round it. So this got rounded up and became 5%. For this one, to days payable outstanding, round it down to 0 decimal points and change it to general format. Okay, and so on. These are not big deals, but maybe something more you learn. Then you round it to 2 decimal points. The dividend rate also round it to 2 decimal points, and that becomes negative 16%. The perpetuity growth rate, do the same thing, round it to 2 decimal points. And becomes negative 5%. Let me go back and see why this is negative. Right, so this perpetuity growth rate, instead of I took the average of B to D only, but free cash flow growth rate historical average is, in fact, right here, everything from here to here is the average. So perpetuity, free cash flow perpetuity growth rate is like that. So 3.45% or 3% rounded up. Okay, so what about these yellow things? Remember, we have already figured out the industry averages of these guys, so we are just going to use the industry averages whenever we can. So cost of goods sold to sales ratio of a business like McDonald's is over here. Industry average is not there, but when we do the comparable firms, and we highlighted for large companies such as McDonald's 589, this is the industry definition through 2 digits IC code. This is our cost of goods sold to ratio. For SG&A, again we go back to the pivot table, SG&A to sales ratio. SG&A to sales ratio is supposed to be 10.6%. And capex and D&A, we go back to the pivot table. And this is 6.7% is our capex, industry average. And D&A, we go back to D&A. In the second to the last column is D&A. D&A is presented as a negative number, so we put a negative in front of it and find that. Okay, so analyst forecast is done. Analyst forecast is just the rounded up and down, so that you have to round up around 2 or 4 decimal points, sorry, up to 2 or 0 decimal points, so that you see a huge number. So you see a whole number. So if it is something like 15.01 or 15.05, you round it down, round it to 0 decimal points. If it is like 5.08%, in fraction it's 0.0508. That's why you go to 2 decimal points and so on. Okay, simple things like that. So make sure if it converted to 0 decimal points, this becomes 0. All right, you don't want that. You want it to be 5%. Okay, and let's create some more scenarios. So this was historical average, this is analyst forecast, and let's create something like optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic scenarios. So let's just assume simple stuff. So optimistic scenario will be like 1% or 1 point higher, depending on whether it's a percentage or a full number. 1% or 1 point higher for good things, and 1% or 1 point lower for bad things. So for example, higher sales growth is good for a free cash flow. So it's going to be, in optimistic scenario, it is going to be 1% higher than analyst forecast. Okay. Cost of goods sold to sales ratio is a bad thing for free cash flow. That's why subtract 1% from that. Same with the SG&A to sales ratio. You want this is a bad thing for free cash flow. That's why you subtract 1% from analyst forecast or industry average. Okay, this is both analyst forecast and industry average. Other operating expense as a percentage of sales is a bad thing for free cash flow. So in optimistic scenario, subtract 1% from it, and you see you get a negative other operating income or expense, but let's leave it like that. It seems unrealistic, but it does not matter. We're just learning things again. Then other income as a percentage of sales is a good thing. So let's increase it by 1%. Increase it by 1% and so on. In fact, let me just drag it all the way down. Okay, drag it all the way down and make some changes here and there. So effective tax rate is a bad thing. Subtract 1%. Days sales outstanding is a bad thing. So you subtract 1. Not 1%, because it's a full number, so it has to be 14. Same here. Days inventory held is a bad thing. You want to turn over your inventory as much as possible, so days inventory held is a bad thing, so subtract 1%. Days payable outstanding, you want to defer your payment to your suppliers as much as possible. That's why you subtract 1 from here. Okay, sorry, subtract 1 from that. Days inventory held, subtract 1 from that. Other current asset as a percentage of sales. Now that is a bad thing for free cash flow, because that is a part of the net working capital, positive side. So you're gonna subtract 1%. Even if it sounds like asset, current asset is bad for free cash flow, increase in current asset, so you subtract 1%. Days payable outstanding is a good thing, because you want to defer payment to your suppliers as much as possible, so you subtract 1 and change the format like that, 20 days. 7%. Other current liability is a good thing for free cash flow, so you add 1. Purchase of intangibles is a bad thing, so you subtract 1%. Capex to sales ratio, again, fewer capex is better for free cash flow if you can maintain your sales, so you subtract 1. DNA to sales, I don't know whether it's good or bad. So depreciation, amortization, why does that matter? That matters for free cash flow. That matters because DNA, everything else remaining the same, DNA kind of saves your cash flow, so it gets added back. So let's increase it. Now this is kind of tricky. Let's increase it by subtracting 1%. Right? The higher the better. The higher negative since gets subtracted, it gets added back in the free cash flow model. Let's do that. A dividend to sales. Dividend does not really matter for free cash flow to the firm, because dividend is a payment to the shareholders. But for the sake of argument, just let's change it to, in optimistic scenario, let's say we have to pay less dividends. So do +1, so that the dividend paid, it gets changed to 15%. And finally, free cash flow perpetuity growth rate, let's add 1% to it and make it 4%. So free cash flow growth rate is obviously good for the firm value. Okay. All right, let's now create two more things called realistic and pessimistic. Okay. So realistic scenario, let's assume, is the same thing as analyst forecast. Okay, so we expect realistic analyst forecast to be the same as a realistic scenario. So realistic analyst scenario as realistic as possible, the most likely to happen, the industry average or analyst forecast. You can have different things as from that, but to make life simple, let's say the realistic scenario is the same thing as analyst forecast. Then now I have to change this format, sorry. Change these formats, change that format, and so on. Okay, now pessimistic one, I'm trying to see how big is the file. All right, almost half a gigabyte, so I have to stop at some point soon. So pessimistic one, so just like optimistic one was 1% above if it is a good thing, 1% below if it is a bad thing. Let's do that opposite. So pessimistic one will be, so sales growth is a good thing for free cash flow. So let's say in the pessimistic scenario it is 1% less. Okay, and let me just continue that and drag it all the way down, and we're gonna make some changes. Cost of goods sold to sales ratio is a bad thing for free cash flow, so let's add 1%. SG&A, bad thing, same thing, add 1%. Add 1%. Then other operating expense is a good thing, so add 1%. Other operating expense is a bad thing, so add 1%. Other income is a good thing, so subtract 1%. Effective tax rate is a bad thing, so add 1%. Days sales outstanding. Days sales outstanding is a bad thing, so add 1, not 1%. Add 1. Days inventory held, same, so add 1. So you're extending more credits, which is bad for, and you're turning your inventory slower, which is a bad thing. Other current assets. Current asset is a bad thing for free cash flow, so let's add 1%. Days payable outstanding is a good thing, so let's subtract 1. Okay, this will give you an opportunity to think about why this is good or bad. Okay, so anything that increases the need of net working capital is bad. Anything that decreases the need for net working capital is good, and you can figure out what increases or decreases net working capital needs from here. Other current liabilities is a bad thing, so subtract 1%. Purchase of intangible is a bad thing, so add 1%. Capex as a percentage of sales is a bad thing for free cash flow, so let's add 1. D&A as a percentage of sales, add 1%. D&A as a percentage of sales is a good thing, everything else remaining the same, so subtract 1%. subtract 1%, but you want to make it smaller in absolute sense, so you're gonna add 1%. Dividend as a percentage of sales, so we want to pay as less dividend as possible ideally. So we want to make, in pessimistic scenario, we want to make it larger, so minus 1%. FCF, perpetuity growth rate, we want it as large as possible in good situations. So in pessimistic situation we subtract 1%. Okay, I have to fix this percentage stuff. Okay, so that would be when we have already, now we have all the possible scenarios that we can plug in to our big model right here, after doing a few things, and I'll show you what we need to do more in the next video. Okay, so let me exit out of this one and save it as a part 1. So once we have these assumptions down, we need a few more things. So we not only have different scenarios of these forecast drivers, but we also have different kinds of cost of equity and cost of weighted average cost of capital, which is another input that will go into our model, right? So what are we going to do about that? So so let's go ahead and also copy our assumptions about cost of capital here. Not assumption, but our calculation already. Remember last time we calculated 6 different types of cost of capital, and you guys are wondering why, and we gave them different names based on how they are calculated. Anyways, you should know it by now. So let's go ahead and copy this. Alright, and copy this and paste it right below the other kinds of assumptions. And let's do copy, paste spatial, and let's give values and transpose it so that they are in a kind of upside down position. So we have 6 different kinds of cost of capital, which is nice. So we have that, and let's also do a realistic, optimistic, and pessimistic versions of it, right? So let's call it optimistic one is the optimistic one, obviously the cost of capital. For the cost of capital, optimistic one is the best or the lowest cost of capital. Realistic, let's make the realistic one just the average of all these things. All right, maybe the better will be the median. So median cost of equity will be median of all 6. Let's make that as our realistic cost of capital, and our pessimistic, again there are different ways you can do this, okay, but let's make that a median as our realistic one, and the pessimistic one obviously is going to be the lowest of these guys, right? So lowest of these guys, sorry, the highest of these guys. So in most pessimistic scenario, your weighted average cost of capital is going to be 11.02%. I know one of these things are higher than the other. Let me increase the decimal points. Okay, so this one is the pessimistic one, so highest cost of capital. Okay. Let me cover that. Let me just circle it and maybe put another box around it to show like these are the values we actually have calculated. So optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic cost of capital. Okay, and after we have that, let's create something called let's label them as discount rate or WSCC. So we have 6 different kinds of WSCC, and from the 6 different kinds we picked out optimistic, realistic, or pessimistic versions. Okay. All right. So once we have that, let's create something called the steps, and you'll see the point of this thing. So let's create the steps that starts from -0.5%, so -0.5%, and goes down in the increment of 0.5. So -0.5%, -0.25%, then obviously it's 0, plus and minus 0.25, and same here, it's just another thing. So 0.5, sorry, minus 0.5, minus 0.25, and so on. So you are going to create like two kinds of steps. This will be for steps for like whole numbers that are not in percentage. This will be steps for example, days sales outstanding. These will be steps for example, SG&A ratio and things like that. Those who are percentages, small, very small numbers, these will be the steps. If they are large enough numbers, these will be the steps. Steps will basically make the model more flexible. You can increase or decrease the numbers over time using these steps. Okay, you'll see how we are going to do that a little bit later. For the time being, let's just create those things. Okay, now after that, let's put down some values called some scenario called sensitivity. We're just typing stuff in and we're going to use that somewhere else. Sensitivity, scenario, the best case scenario, realistic scenario, worst case scenario, and so on. These are the setups that we're going to use later in this sheet when we do the sensitivity analysis stuff. Okay, so we're going to make references to this sheet where we have listed down our assumptions. Driver assumptions are here, and the tables on the basis of these assumptions will be made here. Okay, once we have that, now we are ready to work in building the model, building the sensitivity and scenario model. Okay, let's take one step at a time. What we are going to do eventually again is complete these. So in FCF, DCF, perp, we're going to create this model. So complete these with formulae. So these will have values based on what scenario we are looking at. Okay, and those values, okay, this is the important part, those values right here will be plugged back in to the models here. So right now, as you see, everything is an average. These guys will not be averages anymore. These guys will be formulae linked to this table. Okay, so when the scenario changes and these value will change, so will these value, and your forecast will be different, and everything will be different. Okay, so that is the point. So how do we do that? How do we build that? So what we want here, again, I wanted to show you a final product. So this is a final product where we want these guys to change based on what scenario we are looking at. These guys, see, whenever I do this, these guys will change, and as a result, your forecast will change. These forecasts are no longer the averages. Okay, the forecast will change. Okay, and which will change everything, as you know. So let's do that. So what we are going to do now is create the scenario drop down box. Now these will be some things you need to be very careful about. So start from here and let's create a drop down menu. Okay, that's something where you'll find here. So I'll show you. You have to go to data. Okay, data validation, and click on data validation. Data validation. It says it's a very flexible feature, but we are going to use it in a very specific way. So it says, what values do you want here? We want to allow any value or not. We are going to go to the drop down menu and say where we are going to pick values from a list. Okay, we are not going to allow anything here except for values from a certain list. Let me go back and click this column, just K. Data validation, not any value but values from a list. Okay, and it says it allows for ignores blank and allows for in cell drop down, and you can choose the list. You say we are going to only allow value from a list, so we can choose the list. So the list is here in driver assumptions. Remember, we typed it in because we wanted to pick that as a list, and hit OK. Alright, so what did that do? That gives you a drop down menu. You click here, you can click on any of these things: sensitivity scenario, best case scenario, realistic, and worst case scenario, and so on. Okay. Okay. Once we have this, I'm drinking some water, so you might see some noises, some splashing water and whatnot. So once we have this, we are going to use these as conditions. So that means whenever these change, the stuff over here will change. Okay, so what are we going to do? We have to do some more of these things. So first thing we're going to do is the merge K and L. So I'm going to go data, home, and merge in center, so that this thing is merged. So K and L are merged. And depending on what we type here, we'll have some cases and some steps. Alright, so the case can be historical average. The case can be historical average. For most of these things, the case can be right here, historical average, analyst forecast, optimistic, realistic, or pessimistic stuff. Okay, so for each of these values until here, those will be our cases. Right, so what do we do here? So we do the same thing. We create another list of drop down menus where we say, let me close the other one, where we say our cases are going to be, again, data, what if analysis, scenario, nope, no, not this one, not what if analysis, sorry, I like this too much, data validation, choose from a list, and our source list, our source is now going to be, again, driver assumptions and these guys: historical average, analyst forecast, optimistic, realistic, pessimistic, these guys. Okay, then hit OK. What's going on? One more time, and hit OK. So what it does is it creates cases: historical average, analyst forecast or industry, optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic, and for each of these guys. So we want to create this case list drop down menu for each of these things. Okay, for each of these things, starting from, so if you drag if you just create the values in one cell and drag it down, it will be created, everything will be copied for you. So I'll do that until free cash flow perpetuity growth rate until here. Okay, so one more time. Then each of these have that drop down menu that you can change. Okay, so each of these have the drop down menu that you can change. Okay, it can be different things. All right, for discount rate we have similar but different kinds of scenarios. So for discount rate, we do that one more time. So go to what if analysis, go to data validation, allow for list, and our list is driver assumptions. Our list is this, right? Our list has become different kinds of cost of capital, and hit OK. Now that will give you weighted average cost of capital. So this will give you the flexibility of choosing the kind of cost of capital that you want. They can be realistic, optimistic, pessimistic, or each of these kinds: CAPM, PAMA-French, CAPM using market model, CAPM using bottom-up beta approach, CAPM using PAMA-French, and synthetic rating, and so on. Okay. Now let's do the same thing with, let me boldface it just to show you it's a different thing. Let's do the same thing with steps. Okay, so steps will allow for more flexibility. So allow for you to have realistic situation but increasing by 0.5 or so on. Okay, so steps will be again another drop down menu, but depending on whether it's a days, like it's a big number such as days sales outstanding, or a fraction such as tax rate, it will be, the steps will be either of these things. All right, so let's do that. So in the steps, I'm going to go data validation, list, and the first one is sales growth, I think. List, driver assumptions, so any of these guys. All right, so that will be the list for the sales growth, and you can hit OK. Now that list, the percentage steps. All right, these look like percent, but the format here is not percent. So let's leave that alone for the time being. So so 0.25% and so on. So that worked nicely for sales growth. That will be applicable to most of these guys. Okay, let's see. For sales, so I can copy this whenever these steps are relevant. Cost of goods sold, effective tax rate, these steps are okay. Okay, I can copy it here. All these steps are going to be fine here. Effective tax rate, days sales outstanding, and days inventory held. We need steps of the whole number: half, 1, -1, etc., minus half, etc., because those are like bigger numbers. For other things, these steps are fine. So other current assets, whenever you see percent, these percentage steps are fine. Days payable outstanding, not here. Current liabilities, these steps are fine. Okay, capex to sell, D&A, dividend, these steps are fine. Okay, so let's not do steps for these two guys because this is a little bit different. For weighted average cost of capital and FCF growth rate, let's not do steps for these. Okay. What do I do here? Now for other guys, for example, days payable outstanding, we didn't need that. We are going to override that. Days sales, you cannot delete it like this. Okay, by the way, you have to delete it in a different way. Even if you delete it, it's gonna come back. So I'm going to overwrite it, copy it again because I made a mistake there. So days sales outstanding, I need steps of the whole number. So I'm gonna go to data validation list, go back to driver assumptions and pick these lists, because 0.5% is 0.005 in days is nothing. So we have to kind of pick up these fractions that make more sense there. So do OK. So for days sales outstanding, these are the steps. And for days inventory held, same thing. Copy, paste it here. Days payable outstanding, copy and paste it here. Okay, now these are more proper steps. I'm going to convert all these little numbers to percentages so that they make more sense, they look more nicer. All right, 0.25, 0.25 and so on. But you can pick any of these values. The default, I wanted the default to be 0, maybe just default 0, and then copy it to proper places. Okay, I guess you got the hang of it. Alright, so these are just models, these are not doing anything yet. So what it does eventually is, depending on what scenario we are in, it changes these guys. Alright, now the next step will be to kind of work in that direction. Sometimes this gives me trouble. Alright, I want to make sure I can save it. Alright, current file size is 261, still big enough, so we're gonna continue this one. Alright, so again, it seems like a lot of work and kind of daunting. That's why you need to practice it a few times. Okay, so now let's start to kind of code things in. Now let's start to fill in these boxes with the statements. So what we are going to want to say is this. So let's start from, let's say, best case scenario, right? So if it is a best case scenario, so this is what we want to say. If this guy is the best case scenario, or if this guy is this guy, best case scenario. So let's start from the easy one. Let's start from these three. If this guy, the drop down guy, is the best case scenario, then pick the numbers from optimistic one, then add some steps to it. So our best case scenario is that we have all the optimistic values. We have all the optimistic values, and which will gradually increase or decrease over time, depending on what is a good thing or bad thing. Okay, so let's do the first part only. Let's do the forecast variable for 2016. So it says, if it is a best case scenario, pick the optimistic values. If it is realistic scenario, pick the realistic values. If it is the worst case scenario, pick the pessimistic value. Okay, and so on. Okay, Now that we are going to do that with the help of if statements. Okay, we can do an embedded if statement. We can say if it is the worst case scenario, then pick these values. If not, then we can start another if statement and so on. But there is an easier way to do that. Instead of making a very embedded if statement, we are going to create separate if statements and add them together. Okay, I'll show you what it means. Okay, so let's see 2016 one, right? So if I say equal if this guy is, control page down, control page up, if this guy is in this best case scenario, okay, then for that one pick the optimistic value, that, all right, otherwise close it. Otherwise, then another if statement which we can add here. Okay, so we can close one if statement and add the otherwise situation. It just says if, which means if it is not best case scenario, this part will return a 0 and start the other part. Then we can say if, again, this guy is realistic scenario, then pick the sales value from realistic one, otherwise close. All right, now it will pick the realistic value, this value, if it is a realistic scenario, otherwise it will return 0. So we don't have to do a complicated embedded statement. Plus, if not, then move on and say if this is a pessimistic scenario, this value is worst case scenario, then pick up the value for 2016 from here. Okay, otherwise nothing. All right, so you could do that as an embedded if statement. If this not if, then pick up this value from here, and you can start another if statement here and make a really complicated model. But this, you can make it very simple by doing separate if statement and adding them together. All right, where in your, so in this if statement the logical test will have a value, there will be value if it is true, then you put a comma, then close the parenthesis, that will return basically a 0 if that case is not true. Okay, now we have one more thing. So we have optimistic, pessimistic, realistic. We also have the sensitivity and scenario situation, where which is going to be a little bit different from these guys. So for the time being, just to check whatever we have done so far is okay, what we are going to say is if this guy, now another if statement plus another if statement, if this guy is sensitivity scenario, so we had skipped the first one, we started from best, realistic, worst, then for the time being just put a 9999, all right, on it 9, just put a 9999. so we are going to overwrite 9999 with something else, but for the time being let's just say return 9999 over there. Okay, so what does it do? So it returned me a value, argument which says, it gave me nothing. So if driver assumption, if P3, so let me see where the mistake is. Okay, so I found out where the mistake was. All right, so when we did the if statement, remember these guys are these two cells are merged, so they are called K and L. but this value is actually in the K column. So if I click on this value, I see the first one says K17, and this is always K47. It is always K47. So when we went back and forth, it changed it to K to L47, which it didn't like. So what we're going to do is recode it as, whenever you see the red stuff, you see, change it to K47 here, change that guy to K47. Okay, now change that guy to K47 and so on. Okay, now once we have that, and I want to make sure nothing else is going on, it's always K47. Okay, so it returned me 0.06 or 6%. It's the best case scenario, and it's returning me 6%. If I change it to realistic, it will change to 5%. If I do a worst case scenario, it will change to 4%. Okay. Now what do I want? I want to see what happens if it's a sensitivity scenario. Sensitivity scenario, we're holding the place with just 9999, all right, because it will be a little bit more involving. So right, for the time being, I'm just putting it at 9999, which I'm going to change. This guy I'm going to change once I make sure that so far this code has been working. Okay, so I will don't only want this here, but I want it everywhere else. So I want to be able to drag it across, so that I want to drag it across so that it fills up. Sorry, no, not drag the sideways yet. Drag it down so that it picks up all the values up to FCF perpetuity growth rate and so on. But it does not do that yet because I need to lock this guy. I need to lock this guy because even if I want to drag it down, I want this guy to be the same. So I go ahead and lock K47, K47, K47. Okay, so that's one thing. If I go to driver assumptions here, I want worst case, realistic, best case and sensitivity scenario stuff, these guys to be on the same row and column. I don't want these guys to move anywhere as I drag down. So I'm going to go ahead and lock these ones. So B31, 29 to 31, I'm going to lock that. Sorry, not 21 to 39, but 30 to 33. So 30, 31, 32, 30, 33, all of that I'm going to lock. So F4 here, F4 here, F4 here, F4 here. Okay. So I still have not locked something. But the last one, okay, so the last one still remains as K47 in the first formula. The K47, I'm going to lock it one more time. All the K47, they seem to be locked. This one, this place, this K47 needs to be locked. Okay, this K47 needs to be locked. So once I have it, I'll try to drag it down and see if my value changes. Still something's going on. Oops, somehow it didn't keep the locking. So B30, lock that. B31 from driver assumptions, lock that. B32 from driver assumptions, lock that. B29 from driver assumptions, lock that. Now I should be able to drag it down so that the only thing that changes is that. All right. As I drag down, it should pick up different values from here. It should not change these guys. Okay. You know, if you know how locking works, you should know this. So once I have that, I locked it. I'm happy. So I want to see like if it is historical average, sorry, if it is a best case scenario, optimistic, I'm picking optimistic here, then purchase of intangibles should be negative 1%, right? So if it is a best case scenario, then the purchase of intangible is 1%. Okay, so it seems to be working out fine. Now I can go ahead and copy the formatting. If I select everything and format paint everything and select the same number of cells, the formatting should automatically be done. Okay, so 2016 I have taken care of most of it. So FCF perpetuity growth rate is going to be 4% in optimistic best case scenario. Realistic, it's gonna change. Sensitivity scenario, everything is 9.999%. It has not been done yet. Worst case scenario, it's like that, and so on. Okay, so at least 2016 one seems to be working, except for the sensitivity scenario, which is just a placeholder yet. Okay, so what does that mean? So in sensitivity and scenario approach, excuse me, so what we want is we're going to make this model more flexible. So what we say is if this guy is sensitivity scenario, then it depends on whether I'm looking at a realistic, it depends on how each of these variables set up, right? So with best case, worst case, and realistic scenario, everything will change in the same way as specified before. Everything will change to these columns. But with the sensitivity scenario, we want more flexibility, so it depends on what these values are. So for example, in sensitivity and scenario, I can use this as historical average. That means I want this value to be historical average. Maybe I want this value to be optimistic, and maybe I want this value to be realistic, and I want this value to be pessimistic. So the condition becomes a little bit different. Basically what it says is what I have to say is, if this is sensitivity and scenario, look up this value on this table, right? Look up what this value is on this table. Okay, so for that you need to know something called the HLOOKUP function. I know some of you already know it. Even if you don't, it's easy. It's very similar to VLOOKUP function, but I'm going to give you a very brief idea about what it means. Okay, about VLOOKUP function. I'm going to close this video here so that I can save it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how the HLOOKUP function works. If you guys know how the VLOOKUP function work, is pretty simple. All right, so let's say this is our lookup table, right, from which you can do. So for example, in VLOOKUP you said give me the value associated with days sales outstanding, give me the pessimistic value of days sales outstanding. Okay, using the VLOOKUP function, you'll be doing something like this. So if your lookup value is days sales outstanding, then your lookup value is your VLOOKUP function is VLOOKUP then your lookup value is days sales outstanding, table array is this entire table, let's say, then column index number. Now remember, this is a vertical lookup, so you have columns steps. A column lookup function in this table. I don't know, we're talking about optimistic. So optimistic one is in the 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth column. So give me fourth column value of the date sales outstanding that we looked up, right? So this was the lookup value table array and fourth column. Okay, then we're gonna say range lookup false because we want to match this exact term, date sales outstanding, and you did okay. All right, so you didn't come out anything because this is misspelled. Outstanding. All right, gave you 14 days, give you this number. Now you can pick up the same number using an H lookup function. Okay, so in the H lookup function, you are not looking up something in the column, you'll be looking up something in the rows. So your lookup value will be that. So for the same date sales outstanding, optimistic value of date sales outstanding, for the same 14 number, this number, we can do the following. All right, so we can do, instead of date sales outstanding as a lookup value, we can do optimistic as our lookup value. Let me type optimistic here. Optimistic, and we are going to look at this table, optimistic value and column index number. Instead of column index number, we have row index number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so let's do that. So we do H lookup, then H lookup this value, optimistic value, table array is the same as that. You can select the entire table like that. Then it says row index number. So row index number is, where is the date sales outstanding? In the 8th column, in the 8th row. So 8, and range lookup is false or 0. Okay, 14 again. See that? So it's very analogous. You think of rows instead of columns over there. All right. So let me get rid of all of that just to show you how it works. Okay. So the reason we did this was so that we can deal with the sensitivity and scenario approach. We can H look up each of these values. Okay, each of these values on this table, and depending on what kind of situation scenario it is, we can pick the appropriate value. We can select the appropriate value from this table. Okay, so let's see how we do it. So for example, for the first one, all right, so instead of this 9999, the placeholder, if the driver assumption is B29 sensitivity scenario, then we are going to H look up, maybe open and close both, H look up, and I'm going to look up this function. I'm going to H look up this value. Okay, let me exit out one more time. I'm going to double click, H look up this value K49. So overwrite 9999 and H look up K49. H look up K49. All right, and table array is right here. The driver assumptions, the table array is this whole thing and starting from assumptions. All right, then table array is the whole thing. The row index number is, now this is interesting, is fine. All right, so row index number has to be a number. All right, so delete everything, all the garbage from here. Row index number is, all right, so if it is optimistic, it will pick up this column. If it is realistic, it will pick up this column. And the row index number here is second, 1, 2. Okay, so you can type in 2, but what you want is, as you drag it down in that column, you want this number, this row index number to change from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to 17. Right? So instead of typing row index number, you make a reference to this 2. See this? That's the reason we created this guy. So we do 2 so that as we drag it down, I need to find out cost of goods sold ratio, SG&A ratio, and so on, depending on whether it's optimistic, realistic, or pessimistic. And our range lookup is going to be 0, false. We want exact same match, and hit OK. All right. So it is sensitivity scenario, and I want for this for sales growth, I want optimistic value of 6%, historical value of 5.08%, analyst forecast 5%. So it's changing based on what I have here. Okay, now I have to be careful about when I drag it down. I want some things to change, other things not to change. So I want these guys to change. Let me drag it down and see what happens once I have the sensitivity and scenario here. So it gave me an A. Let me see what it's changing. So as I'm dragging down, first thing I want not to change is this column. Is this the definition of the table? So lookup table has to be exactly the same. All right, so F4. So I'm going to lock that lookup table. This table has to be locked. Okay, let me see if I drag it down, whether it will work. Okay, so it seems to have worked. So DNA, percentage of sales, analyst forecast, industry average is 4.78. Let me see if that's true. Analyst forecast is 4.78, and capex is 6.93. 6.93. How come? Analyst forecast, historical average is 6.93. Okay, that's true. So it depends on what it is. So it should change depending on how I specify things here. Okay, that's why this HLOOKUP thing was important. Okay, you can go back and see once again how this HLOOKUP works. Alright, so 2016, this is how we forecast 2016. Now 2016 forecast is kind of different from others in very small ways. Okay, and so let me go back and again change the format of the entire thing. For some reason the formatting changed. Just 2016 one, sorry, it gave me the line because this was a line. I copy the format from 2014, it's easier. Okay, so I have that. So I want to make sure at least my 2014 works very nicely. Things change and so on. Worst case, everything changes and so on. Now right now these tables are not linked to our main modules. We're just, this table is kind of already is independent. Later on, so that's why even if we change this table, none of these are changing. Okay, so 2016 one, once we build 2016 one, we want to be able to fill in all of these things. Okay, so this is the rule. If it is a best case scenario, in the best case scenario, all our in 2016 we'll start from the optimistic value. In 2016, if the best case scenario, in 2016 we start with the best case value and add in the steps over the year. If it is a good thing, subtract the steps over the years if it is a bad thing. Okay, that's the rule of this game. Okay, so we'll get to that. Before that, remember something interesting. For sensitivity, for best, realistic, and worst case scenario, these guys are pretty useless, because these guys are not going to, in the worst case scenario, no matter what these are not going to change, because all of the 2016 values they come from this table and nothing happens to them. This steps and case is only relevant in sensitivity analysis, sensitivity and scenario. So what we want is, we don't want to see all of this stuff unless it is the sensitivity and scenario. We want all of these guys to hide, because these don't have any information if it is not sensitivity or scenario. Okay, so if it is realistic, optimistic, or anything else, realistic, worst, or optimistic, we don't want to see any of that stuff, because we don't want to make any changes here, or even if we do make changes, it's not going to affect anything. So the first thing we want to do, one of the things we want to do is we want to hide all of this stuff if it is not worst case scenario. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. So we are going to use something called the conditional formatting. And the conditional formatting stuff is going to format these guys based on what these values are. Okay, so we go to Home tab and find out this conditional formatting button. Let me go ahead and select all of this and go to conditional home, conditional formatting, new rule. All right, new rule. And the new rule has lots of different things. It says format all cells based on their values, format all cells that they contain, and so on and so forth. And one of those things, it's called use a formula to determine which cells to format. All right, we're going to click on that. Format values where the formula is true. Okay, so we are going to say the formula is, no new formatting rule is, if this value is not, okay, is not is like greater than or less than or equal to, and both greater than or equal to both, is not, and you have to type in exact same thing. If this guy is not, and you can go back and driver assumptions and to worst case scenario, this guy is not that. Oops. All right, let me do that one more time. Select all these things, data, home, additional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format. So I'm gonna say if this cell is not, is less than or equal to, and greater than or equal to both, and I open the quotation, double quotation, and maybe I'll just type in this thing exactly the same way, WORST space CASE scenario, worst case scenario, then format is, go to format and color that as white. Okay, let's see if it works. So it didn't. Let me try a way to fix that. Okay, so it looks like our might not have typed in this formula. Oh, I said worst case scenario. Maybe they'll work then. Not work. Looks like it did not. So it looks like our we have not set up the formula very correctly. So let me go back. I can delete that case if I select everything that is in here, go to home, conditional formatting, manage rules, and there is a rule in here. I can edit that rule. If I select everything and go to manage rule, select exactly the same thing that we tried to format before, go to the same rule and hit edit rule. All right, let's edit it a little bit more scientifically. All right, so we want this guy, if this guy is not less than or equal to, is not, go back to driver assumptions, click on sensitivity scenario. If it is not that, then format it such that your font, or go to font, is of white color. Font is of white background. Okay, that was the problem. Font color was regular. It keeps saying white background. Font color white. Okay, and hit OK. And hit OK. And hit OK. Now if I change it to something else, best case scenario, it goes away, sensitivity scenario, it goes back, realistic scenario, it goes away. Okay, so we want to see that only if it is sensitivity scenario, otherwise we don't want to see it. Even if these numbers are here, we don't see it. Okay, because it's not going to be any useful. Okay, so once we have that, let's get back to the sensitivity so that we can see everything. Now 2016 has been done, and you can go back and see how this is done so far. Now 2017 onwards, we want all of these guys to increase by, so if it is an optimistic number, if it is optimistic scenario, or sorry, if it's the best case scenario, we want all of these guys to increase by a number, increase by 0.5% or decrease by 0.5% in the subsequent year, 0.5% or half a number in the subsequent years, depending on what they are, right? So for example, if it's the best case scenario, I want this 4%, where I start from 4%, and I want, sorry, if the best case scenario, I start from 6%, and it's a good thing, so I want it to increase by 0.5% every year. Okay, so what I can do is I will say that. So start from here. Once we have that, we say start from here plus, depending on what you are, depending on what scenario it is, add 0.5% or subtract 0.5%. Okay, so what this means is I go equal that value, and that will, it will keep increasing from the subsequent years numbers. Okay, so that number plus, then we are only talking about incremental now. This is already set up. We are only talking about at what rate it will increase. Okay, so what we are going to do is then say if it is best case scenario, increase it by 0.5%. If it is realistic, increase it by 0. If it is pessimistic, decrease it by 0.5%, and so on. Okay, so it's still conditional addition and subtraction, but it's slightly different. So we're going to say if it is best case scenario, add 0.5% to good things, subtract 0.5% to bad things every year, or add 0.5%, add a half or subtract a half every year. You know, these are for days, these are for percentages, depending on what these are. And start from this year. Okay, start from this year and add or subtract those values depending on what these are. Okay, okay, let me show you one with the formula. All right, so let me start from the sensitivity and scenario. Okay, so here we're gonna say equals, let's start from this guy, and we're going to add steps to it based on what it is. So this one plus, then an if statement. If this guy is the best case scenario and lock K47 and lock B30, then what are you going to add, so this is the sales growth, so add that, so 0.5%, otherwise then leave it blank and start, otherwise comma, close parenthesis, and start another if statement. Okay, so we're going to break the if statement to different pieces instead of combining and producing a convoluted if statement. This works nicely and it's easier. Okay, easier to troubleshoot. Now if I can copy the same structure, so if this guy, if K47 is not the best case scenario but the realistic scenario, not 30 but 31, B31, then add 0 to it. Okay, so add B25 to it. Okay, now I close that again. Now here everything changes, everything is locked. As I drag it across 15, 16, 17, 18, I want all of these to remain constant. So I lock that B25, I lock that driver assumption B27, and so on. Then I start another statement, if statement, and do exact same thing and say if driver assumption B31, so if K47 is driver assumption B not 31 but 32, the worst case scenario, and lock that. Then add negative 0.5% to it. Okay. Alright, so we have done best case, realistic, worst case, everything. Now what next? Now what we say is, now this fourth one is sensitivity and scenario. Okay, so we do that and say if K47 is sensitivity and scenario, K47 is sensitivity and scenario, which is B, this is B29, then now what do we add? Now we add these guys, right? So now we add these guys from there. Okay, FCF, DCF, perp, L49, because we can also change the steps. So now we add, if it is B23, then we add this guy. Now these guys, we want these guys to change, so let me close this here. Let me close this here and make the change later. Okay, so since this is pessimistic and this is 0, so it's adding 0 now. But if I say add 0.25 to it, it should have added 0.25, but it did not. Okay, the last sentence one more time. If this guy, and lock that, equals driver assumption, sensitivity and scenario, then add that one. Okay, and add that one, otherwise close it. Okay, so now it has 0.25. Let me show you how this is. Okay, so one thing we want to do is, remember all the addition was 0.5 in realistic, optimistic and pessimistic one. The number that got added were fixed. That's why we fixed those numbers. However, in sensitivity and scenario, as we drag down, we want these guys, we want the rows to change. However, as we drag across, we don't want columns to change. So we are going to lock the purple one right here. We want to lock the column. So F4, hit F4 a few times so that the column is locked, but the rows are not. So I can drag it across, down like that, and make these changes like these. All right. So let me do it in one pass. So then see if I drag it across whether these numbers make sense. I wanted this to keep adding. On F41 I wanted this to keep adding. Oh, I know what happened. So I wanted this to keep adding 0.25. It was supposed to be 4.25, 4.5, 5 and so on. But one thing I did not do was I didn't do K47 and didn't lock the driver assumptions here. Okay, driver assumptions on this table. So I should lock everything in this table. So driver assumption P30, B27, B31, B32, lock the number, driver assumptions, lock that number, and so on. Now once I drag it, it changed to 4.25, 4.5, 4.75, and so on. Now let's see if I can drag it down and have sensible numbers. Okay, it's not done yet, so I'm going to copy the format from 2014 and drag it everywhere. And I see that. Okay, so in sensitivity and scenario, for example, I want this to be realistic. I want to see realistic, if it is realistic, plus some more over time, minus 0.25. So it is realistic. Okay, so for some reason it's not changing. Realistic and 0.25. Okay, that's done. So you want to check what it means. You want to check whether the numbers came out to be as expected. So I want realistic, starting realistic ones, 34%, and the tax rate I want to keep decreasing by 0.25%. And did it decrease? Yes, it did. Now that will only, all of these values will only be useful if it is a sensitivity scenario. If it is best case or worst case, these values do not matter. Okay. Okay, so I think we are almost done here. The only thing you wanna now be careful about is that none of these values added or subtracted right, these values added or subtracted. So for example, in optimistic, let's say best case scenario, we want to, so these, we want not only, so here, so we added or subtracted percentages everywhere. So 14 increases by 1%, and so on, 0.5%, and so on. That's not what we want. We want these guys to increase by one number, not 1%. So that's what we are going to do. So we are going to make changes here so that for these guys, date sales outstanding, payable outstanding, and so on, the addition or subtraction is like the whole number from this column. Everything has been adding and subtracting from this column. We want to add or subtract from these columns for some of these guys. Okay, so not B27. So all we have to do is, instead of B23, 4, 5, 6, 7, we have to say C25, 6, 7. Okay. So instead of B27, we say C27. Instead of B25, we say C25. Instead of B23, we should say C23. And instead of B20, and the sensitivity and scenario, it's okay because these guys are already over here. These guys are already set up as whole numbers or fractions. Okay. So that's what we do here. Copy it across. Now it changed by half, not 0.5%. If I drag it down, I want to see if it works. It works. Drag it across. Okay. Maybe I can copy this thing for the other things too. Let's see. Copy, paste. 20 became 20.5, and so on. Okay. So that's what we want. Let's do one more thing. Now we worry about, we have done everything except the discount rate. Now we are also going to do something about the discount rate. In fact, we don't have to do anything about discount rate. Now next what we are going to do is make references, all these things. The scenarios have been created. Now all of those guys need to be linked to the big table out there, the big table, all our income statement and forecasting variables. So these variables are going to change to whatever we have created here. Okay, and let's do that next. Okay, so let's talk about the weighted average cost of capital. So we know if we are not in a, if we do sensitivity scenario, we can see a whole lot of different things, and optimistic. So look, if you look at discount rate, weighted average cost of capital, it can have different things: realistic, optimistic, and pessimistic, and all of these guys come from the driver assumptions here, right? So so we have many different kinds of weighted average cost of capital estimates, and we want to say if our value is optimistic, if our since our scenario is optimistic scenario, pick this guy. If our scenario is realistic scenario, pick this guy. If it is pessimistic, pick this guy. And then if we want to look at the whole optimistic whole sensitivity scenario, and then it depends on what these values are. What I mean is, if I do best case scenario, I want the weighted average cost of capital, this guy, to be the optimistic one. Okay, if I do pessimistic here, if I do realistic scenario, I want the realistic discount rate here, and so on. And in sensitivity scenario stuff, no matter what these are, the WSCC will depend on what I put in here. All right, that's what I want. So let's see how I can code that. So I'm going to get rid of that 10%, right? So 10%, assume 10% is no longer valid. We have a whole bunch of stuffs going on. So what I can do is I can be very clever here, because a lot of the formula over here is going to be very applicable to the formula here. Okay, so let me show you how. Right, so because I'm going to make references to here, so formula in 2016, weighted average cost of capital formula in 2016 is going to be useful here, because maybe just let's do it. Let me just do it. Type it in so that you can see it one more time. But remember, this formula is going to be very similar, so if you are clever, you can actually copy and paste that formula and make it work. So again, discount rate, I'm gonna say if this guy, sensitivity scenario, and let's lock that. We're not going to drag it across, but let's lock it. If that is equal to the driver assumptions here, best case scenario, then my weighted average cost of capital will be this optimistic one, otherwise, comma, close parenthesis, and I start another if statement. Now I should be able to copy it from here. If this K47, in fact, I can then copy the entire thing after plus and change just a little bit. If K47 is not B30, driver assumption B30, but B31, which is realistic situation, then I want weighted average cost of capital to be J19 instead of I20. It should be J20, so I change it to J20. Now again, comma, close parenthesis, plus if the same thing, that's why I'm able to copy it. If the same thing, K47 is worst case scenario, B32, then I'll have the K20, the pessimistic one, not J20, but K20, pessimistic one, as my discount rate. Now we still have one more left. Okay, so let's stop here to here. Let's stop the formula here and see what I find. I somehow made a mistake somewhere, a little small error. Sorry, not. So I said instead of B31, I just typed 31. So B31. What else? Driver assumptions B32. So it gives me 0 because right now I am in sensitivity scenario and I have not specified a condition for that. Okay, so if I do best case, it changes to 4.89. okay, if it is realistic, it changes to 8.03. okay, now if it is worst case, it changes to 11.02. but if it is sensitivity scenario, I want to specify our own thing each time. It returns 0 because we have not specified a condition for that. Okay, so that's what we are gonna do again with the if statement. Now I can do plus if statement if this guy is equal to, go back to driver assumptions, sensitivity scenario, then again we are going to do a HLOOKUP function. Then we're going to say, then look at this value here and give me the rate associated with it. Then I'm going to say, then I'm going to say HLOOKUP, if value true is HLOOKUP, look up this value and let me pull the function HLOOKUP, look up that value, whether it's if it is sensitivity scenario, look up this value in table array is driver assumptions table right here, this table. Okay, now it's a row input, a row index number because it's in a different row. So a row index number is 2 and range lookup is 0, false. Okay, so I want to see exact same number. So what it does is it picks up, so it picks up the value depending on what it is. So if I want, under sensitivity scenario, if I want optimistic, it will give me the optimistic rate, smallest rate. If I want it pessimistic, it will give me the pessimistic rate, pessimistic discount rate, and so on. Okay, so it is a lot to take in. However, this model makes your analysis really flexible. So again, it is daunting when you start, but if you do it a few times, you should be fine. Okay, so let's hope for that. Alright, so that was for the discount rate. Let's also do the free cash flow growth rate. Right, we can assume free cash flow rate is going to remain as average, or it's going to change depending on our analysis. Again, we can go we can do a similar thing here. We are going to say, if we go to driver assumption, we have free cash flow different values, historical, analyst, forecast, optimistic, pessimistic, and realistic. We can apply these things. We can apply that here. Now here the formula becomes really similar to other things we did, right? So this formula was, since this is from the same table, this formula, free cash flow formula, is going to be similar to what we see here. So let me just copy this. Let me just copy the inside of this formula. I've got the formula. and paste it here. Okay, now let's see what changes, what we need. If we say, if it is K47, if this value is K47, if the value K47 is B30, is the optimistic one, B30 is the optimistic one, B30 is optimistic, 31 realistic, 32 pessimistic. So if it is optimistic one, pick this value. If it's realistic, pick this value. If it is pessimistic, pick this value. Okay, that's all it says. So let's do that. So if driver assumptions, this is B30, if it is optimistic, pick not the E2 one in driver assumptions, but E17, because that's the optimistic one. The other one will be F17 in realistic situation. The other one will be G17. So EFG17. So E17, then not F2 but F17 in realistic situation. In pessimistic situation, in B32, G17. Okay, so we have done optimistic, pessimistic, realistic. Now we have to do the sensitivity and scenario approach. So what do we do here? Now in sensitivity scenario, the HLOOKUP function will work like that. Go to the HLOOKUP function, then find out, depending on whether historical average for analyst forecast, optimistic, pessimistic, HLOOKUP all the way to column 17. Okay, so HLOOKUP, if this driver assumption is sensitivity scenario, then HLOOKUP not K19, so HLOOKUP not this K19 value but this value, K65 value, HLOOKUP that, in driver assumptions, that big table, and go to the 17th column. So let me pull the HLOOKUP formula. So look at K45, get K45, table array, same big table, big one. Alright, then row index number is the 17 number, 17, and range lookup is 0. Okay, so if it is sensitivity scenario stuff, just use the HLOOKUP function. So what is it right now? It is optimistic, so it's 4%. If it is pessimistic, then let's see how percent it is. Pessimistic, it's not changing for some reason. K45, optimistic, FCF growth rate, alright, let me see if I do optimistic here. So best case scenario changes, does not change. So best case scenario, realistic scenario, okay, it changed to 3%. So best case scenario, optimistic scenario 4%, realistic scenario 3%, and then it is 2% worst case scenario. So let me see if it's changing. Then worst case scenario, it should be 2%. Okay, it is 2%. Now let's look at sensitivity and say pessimistic, and let's see what that gives us. 2%. Okay, it's working, so that's good. So now this formula, discount rate and free cash flow growth rate, they have been already linked. Okay, so this is already linked with this big table, so that works. Now next what we need to do is to link all of this stuff back to our original tables. Okay, so go back to our income statement and say, now sales growth, cost of goods sold, SG&A are not historical value anymore, but that equals these values. Okay, so 4%, right now they are 4% and so on. They're optimistic situation, they're in optimistic situation, so they're increasing over time. And I'll drag it down and see all of that changes depending on how the stuff over there will change. Then I go to balance sheet and start to change, not do anything with the historical remains the same. The forecast variable, instead of being historical stuff, the forecast variable, instead of being remaining historical stuff, is going to change to, okay, starting from days sales outstanding. So days sales outstanding, this guy, okay, goes all the way across, goes all the way down, and so on. Okay. Statement of cash flow, the only thing that's going to change is the dividend here. So go back to that and say dividends are going to be that. Just drag it across. Alright, now let's see what the value has been for us. So implied stock price in, so the implied stock price in, let me see, in the best case scenario is going to be $61. Implied stock price in realistic scenario is going to be $52. Implied stock price in the worst case scenario is going to be -$84. Okay, so as you know, this formula is not foolproof. This negative stock price means our free cash flow valuation has not been that good, and so on. The one thing that happened was our free cash flow growth rate, interestingly enough, the worst case scenario, it kind of blew up. Okay, so it decreased by 18, and so on. The free cash flow blew up. So I go to sensitivity scenario, maybe change everything to pessimistic, except for pessimistic here, pessimistic here, pessimistic here. Maybe change everything to pessimistic, and see how that changes our value. So everything pessimistic except for, what is that? DNA, and so on. So everything is pessimistic, 25.06. So interestingly enough, if I make that pessimistic, so our pessimistic is not exactly the same as worst case scenario, because the worst case scenario will start from pessimistic and keep on decreasing or increasing depending on what happens. Okay, so if we do everything pessimistic, then 25.26%. So the model, the final result does not matter. The final result does not have to be exactly correct. So in the worst case scenario, if it blows up, it blows up. We don't, I don't mind that, and you can go back and interpret why is that true. But so this is the final outcome I wanted to see, right? So look how flexible this model is. Now still, it's not a perfect thing. It's not a perfect thing, but imagine what kind of analysis, what are the possibilities in here. We can do lots and lots of different things to this model to see the effect of each of these things. in our evaluation. We can say, all right, let's say everything is realistic. So let's say in sensitivity scenario, I can say everything is realistic. Everything is realistic except I want everything will be at the historical average, and you can do this. Okay, as long as these categories are the same, you can do that. See, WSCC is different, so don't drag it across in WSCC. Everything will be historical average. So everything can be historical average, and you have to make sure this is 0 to otherwise the historical average will keep on increasing or decreasing. So everything is historical average, except that we want our sales cost of goods sold to be our optimistic, you know. Cost of goods sold to be pessimistic is larger, optimistic is smaller, realistic is 72.97, optimistic is 71.94, pessimistic is 73.94, and so on. Let's see how these guys are. Optimistic cost of goods sold, optimistic is 71, realistic is 72, pessimistic is 73, because these guys came from analyst forecast, right? So I want everything to be some other things to be optimistic and so on, right? I can change like that. So okay, so try to do this thing for Amazon.com. I know this was a long video, and I really appreciate you guys staying here. And doing this thing for us. So something happened when I changed this to WSCC Pharma Friends plus SR CPT. Maybe the HLOOKUP function did not like that, and so on. So if I do optimistic, realistic, pessimistic, it works out. So free cash flow growth rate becomes -2, so it will not be foolproof, and there will be a lot of troubleshooting to be done, but it should at least work in some situations. So realistic, best case scenario, for some reason these are not working out, because the circular reasoning function kind of gets messed up and all that stuff. So options, formally circular reasoning is working. That means I have to retype this thing. Fully diluted shares start with 1000 and then change it back to that. Okay, so sometimes it will do that. So let's go back to the worst case scenario and so on. Okay, so try this and do your best with the homework. The more you practice, the more you do the troubleshooting, the better you'll get at it. I want to see like at least most of your sensitivity and scenario stuff works. It has been a lot of work, I understand, but you can do it. I had to go through a few steps to get a full grasp of this thing myself. So if you try hard enough, you'll get a hang of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and we'll be doing the practice on Tuesday's class as well as on Thursday's class, and this homework is due Friday, so you will have plenty of time as well as plenty of opportunity to meet me and during this time. Okay, all the best. Thank you very much. Bye. Again, one more thing, this will be posted over there. This will be posted on Canva, so you can see the formula and things like that to help you further. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day.